They weren't crying. That's what made him stop. 3 figures, still as fence posts, sat against the scorched wall of the abandoned train station. 2 small ones huddled at the hem of the third. A woman slumped forward as if sleep had betrayed her mid-breath. Colt Merrick didn't believe in ghosts. But the sight put a catch in his throat, the kind a man gets when he stumbles on something sacred or wrong. He swung off his gelding and stepped into the dust with quiet boots. The horse stirred once and then stilled again, as if it too sensed something had gone off-kilter in the day. The woman's wrists were bound with torn linen. Her face was smeared with dried blood at the temple, strands of chestnut hair clinging to her skin. Her dress, dark blue once, now gray with dust, was torn above the knees, the stitching at the collar ripped. Her feet were bare. So were the feet of the girls beside her. The older child, maybe 6, raised her chin first. Eyes like polished glass, wide, rimmed in red but dry. The younger one leaned into her sister's side and gripped a strip of faded cloth like a talisman. Neither spoke. Neither blinked. Colt crouched low. "You hurt bad?" he asked the woman softly, not expecting an answer. Her eyes flickered open, hazel and haunted. She tried to sit up, failed. Her voice, when it came, was breath scraped against stone. "Are you a real?" "I reckon I am," Colt said. He pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and brought it to her lips. She sipped without spilling. The girls didn't move, but their eyes followed every motion of the stranger's hand. When he turned to them, the younger girl flinched, just barely. The older one placed a thin hand on her sister's shoulder, and that was answer enough. "Don't touch her. Don't touch us." Colt understood that kind of silence. It wasn't fear that made you loud, it was fear that made you quiet. He looked at the woman again. "You got a name?" She licked cracked lips. "Willa." "All right, Willa. I'm Colt." He tilted his hat back. "You mind if I cut these?" She shook her head, dazed. He sliced through the bindings gently, like he was freeing something sacred from ruin. Then he did the same for the girls, ankle ropes so tight they'd left shallow ridges in the skin. The girls held still. Even when the rope dropped away, they stayed curled like they weren't sure the freedom was theirs to take. He lifted Willa in his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, limp like someone who'd stopped expecting rescue. As he turned toward his horse, one of the girls, June he'd learn later, took a trembling step after him. The younger followed. They said nothing, just walked, barefoot, into the prints he left in the dust. The barn behind Colt's cabin wasn't grand, but it was dry and warm. He laid Willa in the hayloft, fetched a wool blanket, and kindled the lantern. The girls stayed at the edge, clinging to each other, watching. He offered them jerky and a can of peaches. They didn't touch it. Only when he turned his back did he hear the soft clink of tin and the faintest rustle. Willa opened her eyes again some time after dark. Moonlight sifted in through the slats like ash falling upward. She tried to sit, winced, and looked around. Her girls were asleep at her feet, curled like pups. "You're kind," she whispered. "I ain't done anything worth calling that," Colt said from the corner, where he was polishing his old rifle. "You stopped." "I did." She closed her eyes. "That's more than most." He didn't ask what happened. The shape of it was already plain, a woman thrown out like broken tack, discarded in shame and silence. Probably blamed for some man's debts or sins. He'd seen it before. Folks could justify any cruelty when they wrapped it in the language of righteousness. "I thought the train'd come," she murmured, voice soft as hay. He frowned. "There ain't been a train at that station in years." "I know," she said, almost smiling. "Guess they knew I wouldn't run far." He didn't ask who they were. He already hated them. Morning came bright and golden, cruel in its beauty. Willa limped out of the barn and blinked at the sight of the wide, broken land. Her dress was still torn. Her daughters held to either side of her like shadows stitched at the hip. Colt was out in the paddock with a pitchfork, his coat off, arms sun-browned and roped with quiet strength. He nodded once, not pausing in his work. "Coffee's on the stove." She hesitated, then stepped toward the porch. Inside, The cabin was clean but bare. A coat rack with one coat, a shelf of worn books, a pair of wooden chairs, and a little table where 3 tin cups sat, one clean, 2 dusty. She touched the dust on one of the cups with her thumb. Left a mark, a place. That night, when she tried to wash the girls with rainwater from the basin, June pulled away. Willa stilled. "It's all right," she said. "We're not going back." The girls stared at her. "You believe me?" June didn't nod. But she didn't pull away again. Colt watched from the window. He'd seen enough of bruises in his life to know which one's words couldn't reach. 3 days passed. No questions. No demands. Willa cleaned the cabin. Cooked what little Colt brought in. She never asked to stay, and he never asked her to leave. The silence stretched, not cold, but careful. On the 4th day, she found a wooden comb on the table. Handmade. Smoothed edges. She picked it up and almost wept. That night, she used it on June and Bess, and the girls didn't flinch. Later, when the house had gone still, she stepped onto the porch where Colt sat carving something from a block of pine. "You don't say much," she said. He didn't look up. Never been good at words. She stepped closer. "Then why help a stranger?" He paused. "Set the carving down. Because once, I needed help. And no one stopped." Willa breathed in. The stars above them were so clear they looked almost like cracks in the sky, letting some higher light bleed through. She sat beside him. Not touching. Just near. "I didn't run," she said. "They dragged me." He nodded. "My husband died last winter. His people said it was my fault. That I drained him dry. That I tempted him into ruin." She looked at her hands. "They said I cursed him. That I was no good to bury proper, and too shamed to mourn." "They're wrong," Colt said simply. It was the first time he spoke without being asked. She turned toward him then, the wind lifting her unwashed hair. Her eyes caught his in the dark, uncertain, afraid to hope. "And what do you see?" He stood and opened the cabin door. Inside, the girls were asleep on the floor beside the fire. Their faces peaceful, bellies full, hands unbound. He looked back at her. Something worth saving. That night, she dreamt of her daughters running across open fields, feet bare, hair clean, laughter in the wind. When she woke, tears streaked her cheeks. Outside, the sun had just begun to rise. The light touched the hills in amber streaks. She stepped out onto the porch barefoot, the wooden comb still in her hand. Colt was saddling his horse. "You leaving?" she asked. He paused. "Just the town. Supplies." She swallowed. "They'll see you." He gave a quiet shrug. "Let 'em look." And with that, he rode off, dust rising behind him like a vow. She watched until he disappeared behind the ridge. Then turned, saw the 2 dusty tin cups still on the table. She picked one up, wiped it clean, set it next to her daughters. Then, with careful hands, she poured water for 3. The coffee boiled too strong that morning. Willa wasn't used to the smell of it, not without men shouting over tin cups or slamming doors before breakfast. But here, the cabin had its own rhythm. The fire crackled slow. The floor creaked only when the girls tiptoed barefoot from the corner where they'd slept like seedlings pressed to earth. Colt sat outside sharpening a blade, not looking at her. He never did, not directly. And yet she felt watched, not in fear, but in quiet witness. She ladled coffee into 3 cups, hesitated, then left one on the porch rail beside him. He gave a small nod, nothing more. She returned inside, hands shaking as she poured the rest. The girls drank in silence, legs dangling from the stool. The tin cup was warm in her hands. She sipped it like a question. Later that morning, a wagon wheel creaked up the path. Willa stiffened. She moved the girls behind her, heart thudding. Colt didn't reach for his rifle, only wiped his hands on a rag and stepped down the porch stairs. A stout woman with gray hair and opinions stepped down from a rickety wagon. Her eyes scanned the scene with surgical precision. The barefoot girls, the young widow with her hair tied back in a kerchief, the rancher who still hadn't said a dozen words since the season turned. "Well," she said, voice sharp as fence wire. "Didn't think you'd take to housekeeping, Colt Merrick." "Didn't," he answered. She eyed Willa. "You're the one from the station." Willa didn't speak. "I'm Widow Dean," the woman said. "I live 3 fences down. I brought beans and judgment, though you can keep whichever you like." She handed a sack over and turned to the girls. "They yours?" Willa nodded. "Pretty." "They're not for sale," Willa said too fast. Widow Dean blinked, then smiled. "Didn't say they were. But you'd best know folks are talking already." "About what?" The woman smirked. "Doesn't matter. They'll talk either way." She left as suddenly as she came. The dust rose behind her wagon like trailing thoughts. Inside, Willa washed the beans with trembling hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to." "You were right to speak," Colt said. She looked at him. "You aren't worried what the town will say?" He stirred the fire. "Town's been wrong before." That evening, he brought in planks and hammered together something on the porch. The girls watched, eyes bright with questions they didn't ask. Willa stayed at the doorframe, arms folded. "What's that?" she asked. "Bench." "For what?" He looked at her, just once. "For sitting together." She said nothing, but when he finished, she sat on it first. Not beside him, just near. And that, somehow, felt louder than any words. In the weeks that followed, things fell into rhythm. Willa swept, cooked, sewed small patches into the girls' dresses with thread too thin to trust. Colt worked the land, fixed what needed fixing, carved small things in the evening, buttons, combs, wooden spools. Each night he placed something new on the table. A fork carved from walnut, a spoon curved like a ladle, a button shaped like a flower. Gifts, though he never called them that. And still, he said little. But Willa noticed his shoulders slouch when he entered, not in defeat but in relief. Not many men felt safer coming home than they did out in the world. She realized he was one of them. One night, after the girls were asleep, Willa sat on the porch and watched the moonrise. Colt joined her, a block of wood in his hands. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Company. Laughter. The sound of something besides quiet." He thought, "Some kinds of quiet feel like healing." She smiled. "And others feel like punishment." He nodded. Willa took a long breath. "I wasn't always like this." "I know." She turned to him. "How?" He set the carving down, half a cradle, unfinished, and met her eyes. "Because they didn't take your softness. Just made it harder to show." She looked away. But her hand found the comb he'd carved and ran it through her hair, slow, almost reverent. That night, she dreamt she was singing again. In a house with no doors, just windows open to stars. The next morning, June wouldn't eat. Her cheeks were flushed, her small hands cold. "She's just tired," Willa said, brushing her hair back. But the fear in her voice betrayed her. Colt touched the girl's forehead. Then his jaw locked, and he was out the door. The sound of a horse galloping cracked through the silence like thunder. Rain began to fall. Not soft, not apologetic, but hard, like the sky was breaking open. Willa sat beside June and held her hand. Rocked her. Whispered stories about a kingdom made of daisies and lakes made of sugar. Bess sat nearby, thumb in mouth, watching. The hours passed. Then, hoofbeats again. Colt burst in soaked to the skin, with a doctor in tow. He didn't say a word. Just stepped aside as the man knelt beside the child. "She's burning up," the doctor said. "You did right to ride." He gave her bitter root and cool cloths. In time, the fever broke. Willa sat at the foot of the bed that night, brushing the girl's hair with fingers still trembling. Colt didn't go far. Just waited near, a shadow beside the door, silent as ever. When June finally stirred, whispering for water, Willa began to cry. Not from panic, but from something deeper. Gratitude that had nowhere to go but down her cheeks. Later, as the fire crackled low, she stepped outside. Rain still dripped from the eaves. She found Colt sitting under the awning, soaked blanket around his shoulders. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He looked at her, rain streaking his face. "Didn't think about it. Just did." She sat beside him, knees almost touching. "I thought I had to survive everything alone. But you came back." Colt nodded. "You shouldn't have had to think otherwise." She looked down at her lap. "You haven't asked me about him. My husband." "I don't need to." She raised her eyes. "Why?" Colt looked into the dark where the land vanished. "'Cause I've seen what kind of man leaves bruises and ropes behind." The wind moved between them like a third voice. "I buried him myself," she said, voice breaking. "I still hear him when I sleep." Colt didn't answer right away. Then, "I buried someone too. Long time ago." She waited. He didn't say who, but the ache in his voice told her it mattered. The rain eased. The night softened. Back inside, the girls slept peacefully. Willa brushed hair from their brows, tucked them in like pages in a book she never thought she'd read again. Outside, Colt stood by the window, watching. Not through glass, but from a distance. As if afraid that getting too close might break the spell. She saw him. She didn't wave. But she left the curtain open. The next morning, the sun rose clean and gold. June sat up and asked for milk. Willa laughed, the sound raw and real. That afternoon, she took the comb, the carved spoon, and the flower-shaped button, and placed them gently in a wooden box. On the lid, she etched a single word with the back of a needle. But just as she finished, a wagon rumbled down the trail again. She stood at the window. It wasn't Widow Dean this time. It was someone in a black coat. A man with a seal pinned to his lapel. And he didn't come alone. The man in the black coat didn't smile. He didn't speak, either, not at first. Just dismounted from his horse and surveyed the cabin like a foreman inspecting a broken fence. His boots made no sound in the dust, but Willa felt each step like a strike against the boards beneath her feet. Colt stood at her side on the porch, arms folded. The girls peered out from behind the doorframe, June with one hand gripping her mother's skirt, Bess clutching her sister's sleeve. Their eyes had gone wide again, like they had at the station. "Colt Merrick," the man said. "You've taken in strays, I hear." Colt didn't answer. "I'm Mayor Brandt," the man continued, voice like cold iron. "Come to speak with the woman." Willa didn't move. She hadn't heard that name in months. Not since the night they dragged her from her own home, whispering things she never got to answer. Brandt adjusted his coat. "Miss Hartley." "Mrs." she corrected, almost without breath. He raised an eyebrow. "Widowed." "Yes, I know. Though that's not what some say." She blinked slowly, forcing the heat in her throat back down. "I don't care what they say." Brandt took a step closer. "You do. Because they're calling you unfit. Said your husband's death left debts unpaid. That your girls may be better off in more lawful homes." Colt shifted. The wood groaned beneath his heel. Willa's voice came smaller this time. "You want to take my daughters." "I'm here to assess," Brandt said smoothly. "Your late husband owed this town dearly. And a woman of your background, with no kin, no papers of property, no legal standing." "She has a place now," Colt interrupted, voice even but sharp. Brandt turned to him. "A place, yes. A name, no." That silence pressed heavier than any shout. "She's not on the deed," Brandt said. "You haven't married her." Willa didn't flinch, but her fingers curled tightly around the porch rail. June stepped forward, but Willa's hand stopped her with a silent, downward touch. "She's here," Colt said. "That's enough." Brandt's gaze moved back to Willa. "Tell me who tied you at that station." Her lips parted, then closed. "You're protecting them?" he asked. "I'm protecting my daughters," she said. "From the truth. Truth'll come out either way," he warned. "Better it come from your mouth than theirs." Willa stared straight ahead. "I'll speak when I choose." Brant shook his head. "You won't speak at all. That's the problem." He turned, remounted, and said over his shoulder, "Don't get too used to your borrowed shelter. The law has eyes now." The hooves faded into the hills. That night, Willa sat alone by the fire, her hands empty. She hadn't sewn that evening, hadn't cooked. She hadn't touched the wooden box she'd etched the word home into, and it sat on the mantel like a taunt. Colt came in, muddy from the fields, and looked at her, waiting. She didn't say anything. The fire crackled. June and Bess were curled up on the floor under a patched quilt, sleeping back to back like twins from the same dream. "Why won't you name them?" Colt asked softly. Willa looked into the flames. "Because when you name something, it becomes real again. They took everything from me. My house, my food, my voice. And your girls." She swallowed. "Nearly." Colt crouched beside her. "That man's wrong. The law don't see what I see." She turned to him, slowly, her eyes wet but not broken. "What do you see?" He didn't blink. Someone still standing. Her breath caught, and her hand rose to her mouth. It was the first kind thing anyone had said about her in years that didn't have pity clinging to it like mold. The next morning, the girls played near the edge of the field, chasing moths in the tall yellow grass. Willa stood with a bucket of clean clothes, sun on her shoulders. It should have been an ordinary moment, but something in her chest twisted. She looked toward town, then at Colt's back as he chopped wood. The words began building inside her, tight, heavy. She walked to him. "I was 16 when I married," she said suddenly. He paused. He was 30, and angry even when he smiled. She looked down. "The Brants gave us a cabin. Said it was charity, but it came with debt. My husband drank. He worked the rail but got hurt. After that, I carried the rest. They said I owed for his injury, his debts, his shame." Colt dropped the axe softly into the dirt. "When he died, they said it was my fault. That my presence was cursed. That I'd led him into ruin." Her voice broke, but she pressed on. "Then they came in the night. Said the girls were no longer safe under my roof. That I should leave. But not alone." He waited. "They tied me to the station post like freight too broken to sell." She finished with a whisper. "And then you came." He stepped forward, brushed a lock of hair from her cheek with the back of his hand. The gesture didn't beg. It didn't ask for anything. She leaned into it for just a second, then stepped back. "I want to stay," she said, "but I won't let them take my daughters. Not again." "You won't have to," Colt said. 2 days later, the town gathered at the chapel for Widow Dean's cousin's funeral. Colt didn't attend church, but this time, he saddled the wagon and hitched the horse. Willa blinked at him from the porch. "You're going into town?" "You're coming with," he said. She paled. "People." "Already talking," he said. "Let 'em see you." She almost turned away. Then June took her hand. "Mama," she whispered, "can we go too?" Willa looked at their faces. All of them. And nodded. The chapel stood white and square against the sky, its bell like a rusted warble. Townsfolk looked up as Colt's wagon rolled in. Eyes followed them down the path. Whispers rose like dust. "That's her. The widow. Those are the girls. What kind of man brings shame to God's house?" Willa held her chin steady. June and Bess each clutched one of her hands. Colt walked beside them, one step behind, a quiet wall at her back. Inside, the air smelled like pine polish and old voices. Widow Dean caught Willa's eye and gave the smallest nod. A seat had been left open at the far end of the pew. She took it. As the preacher spoke about mercy and time, Willa sat with her girls in her lap. Colt stood near the door, hat in hand. The congregation pretended not to stare. After the hymn, Willa turned, spoke not to the preacher, but to the people. I buried my husband under the cottonwoods, alone. My daughters never got to say goodbye. Not one of you came. And now you whisper that we're a shame to your streets. The chapel went still. I am not ashamed, she said, voice firm but low. I was left to die, and a man carried me out of that dust without asking who I'd been. He just saw I was still breathing. Brant stood from the front pew. This is neither the place nor. Willa raised her hand. It's exactly the place. If this town has a heart, it should beat here. She sat. Colt stepped forward then. His voice, like his presence, was quiet but immovable. She stays with me. And those girls stay too. The preacher looked at the girls. At Willa. At the fear still flickering beneath their stillness. Amen, he whispered. That night, back at the ranch, Willa sat on the porch, the girls tucked in their bed. Colt brought out a cup of coffee and set it beside her. She didn't touch it. I think I made them hate me more, she said. Maybe. Or maybe they just saw something they couldn't unsee. She turned to him. Do you believe in second chances? He shrugged. Reckon the earth does. Why else would it bloom again after winter? The wind rose. Stars stretched long and silent across the sky. Inside the cabin, the girls slept between a fire and a mother who finally spoke her truth. But Colt didn't see them. His eyes were fixed on the edge of the hill. A lone rider was watching the house from the ridge. And he wasn't wearing a badge. The rider on the ridge didn't move. Not for a long time. Just sat on his horse, still as bone, like the wind itself had stopped to listen. Colt Merrick didn't wave. He didn't call out. He simply stood there in the dark, hands loose at his sides, eyes fixed on the silhouette. The man didn't bear a badge. That was worse. A badge meant law. This meant something else. Something quieter. More dangerous. By morning, the rider was gone. But trouble didn't vanish with him. 2 days later, the knock on the cabin door came just before noon. A sharp, deliberate rap that silenced even the birds. Willa stood frozen at the stove, hands flour-covered. Bess had been playing with her doll on the rug. June stood by the window. Colt answered it. Mayor Brant stood there, clean-shaven and smug, flanked by 2 unfamiliar men. One wore a gray coat, city-cut and polished. The other had the look of a tracker, thin, hollow-cheeked, fingers twitching near his belt. Brant didn't wait to be asked in. Warrant's been signed, he said. Those girls are to be taken into protective custody until the court settles who's best fit to raise them. Willa stepped forward, voice shaking. By who? County judge in Fort Baylor. He's read the petitions. Considers your standing, given the death, the debts, your silence, unfit. Colt moved between them and the girls. They ain't going anywhere. The man in the gray coat pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it up. The seal caught the light like a knife. It's legal, he said. But it doesn't have to be hard. Willa grabbed June and Bess behind her, arms a shield. You think you can undo everything with ink and a lie? Brant stepped toward her. You refused to name those who left you tied like a criminal. We asked. You stayed silent. Now the law speaks for you. Colt's voice dropped low. And what if she names them now? Brant's eyes narrowed. Willa felt the girls trembling behind her, heard the fragile breath Bess took like she was bracing to be ripped away again. Something hardened inside her. Not rage. No, something older. Something carved from bone and love and all the years she'd been told to lower her eyes and say thank you for cruelty. She stepped forward. My husband's cousin, Roy Tellum, tied me. On Brant's orders. Said it was mercy, sending me off that way. Said the girls needed correcting. Said women like me ruined the shape of a town. Silence dropped like stone. Colt's jaw clenched. The man in gray looked at Brant. She wasn't finished. I kept quiet because I thought it would spare my daughters the shame. But I see now, my silence was just their weapon. Her eyes found the girls, wide-eyed behind her. I'd rather them know the truth than ever believe I left them by choice. The tracker spoke then. Roy, tell 'em that the one runs grain from Elkhorn. Colt answered, that's the one. Been questions about him, the tracker muttered. Brant's voice cracked. This is hearsay, emotional rambling from a woman with motive. She named a man, the tracker interrupted. You said she wouldn't speak. She's protecting her own sins. She named you, Colt said. Brant's face paled. I acted on the town's behalf. Then you won't mind if I ride to Fort Baylor myself, Colt said. Have the judge hear the full thing. In person. The gray-coated man cleared his throat. Mayor Brant, perhaps we should delay enforcement. Brant turned. You're supposed to be here with me. I'm here with the paper, the man said flatly. And now the paper's torn. He tucked the warrant back into his coat and turned to Colt. She can stay. For now. But if a trial is called, she'll be expected to appear. You both will. They turned and left. No words. Just wind. And dust. Inside, Bess had started crying, not loud, but into her hands, as if afraid the sound might call the men back. June sat beside her, arms wrapped around her tightly, her small face pressed into her sister's hair. Willa knelt beside them. You're safe, she whispered. You hear me? You're safe. But the girls didn't answer. Not yet. That night, Colt didn't eat. He sat on the porch instead, staring into the horizon, carving the edge of something in his palm. The moon rose slow behind him. Willa stepped out and sat beside him, not speaking. The smell of split pine hung between them. After a while, she said, I never wanted to say the name. I thought silence would protect the girls. He didn't look at her. They already knew the fear. She nodded. But not the reason. Now he turned. And now they know you stood. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I was waiting for someone to say it for me. To stand up for me. You didn't wait, he said. You said it yourself. He set the carving in her lap. A small shape. A bird. Wings out. Head up. It wasn't perfect, but it was whole. She looked at it, then at him. Why do you make things and give them away? He met her eyes, quiet. Because they last longer than my words. She reached out slowly, touched the side of his face, the old scar that ran along his jaw. Her fingers trembled. He closed his eyes. Inside, the girls were finally asleep, curled like roots wrapped around one another. The firelight flickered on their faces. Safe, for tonight. But trouble never wandered far out here. Word had a way of traveling. And silence, once broken, could be louder than gunfire. The next morning, word had spread. Cass Tate rode out from town and handed Colt a folded slip of paper, unsigned but bearing news. Roy Tellem had fled. Disappeared in the night. That's guilt, Cass muttered. Or something worse. Willa folded the paper and tucked it into her apron. I don't know what comes next, she said. Colt stepped closer. You do. She blinked. What? You speak. You stand. You stay. Her lips parted. Her hand trembled. But she didn't cry. Not yet. She simply nodded. That evening, June placed her worn shoes by the porch step and stood barefoot beside the bench Colt had built. She didn't speak. But she reached up and slid her hand into his. He looked down at her, startled. Then closed his hand gently over hers. Inside, Willa watched through the window, hands resting on the frame like a prayer. Behind her, the kettle whistled. She didn't move to answer it. She stood there, still, holding the quiet in her chest like something she'd finally earned. The sun dipped below the horizon, dragging gold and rust across the sky. And for the first time since the station, the dust settled around their home without fear. But the next morning, An envelope arrived, tied in red ribbon, unmarked. Willa opened it. Inside were 2 names, hers and Colt's, with 1 word beneath them, written in ink that hadn't yet dried. Summoned. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.